So hopefully you're in the right place. You're seeing things the way you should be seeing it. Today we're going to be talking about risk. Risk is probably the most important thing to help a small business grow in the federal government contracting industry. It is literally that important. So let's get started here. Again, don't forget about your free course, and it's focused exclusively on risk and how you can write a low risk proposal. And again, that is the most important thing that you can do. This is my credibility slide. I'm supposed to do that. That's what all the courses tell you when you're doing a webinar, so people will believe half the stuff that you say. My real credibility slide is the next one, but I'll do what I'm supposed to do. I won about $2 billion in federal government contracts with both big and small businesses. My personal small businesses that I've owned, we've won nearly $400 million in large small business set aside contracts. Those logos to the right are my babies. I either launched them, led them, owned them, or co-owned them, and they all led to successful market exits. The headlines to the right of those, Washington Technology is kind of like the Wall Street Journal for our industry. And for whatever reason, they still have some old headlines. So what I did is I snagged a few of those just to show you that the small business set aside program, they're not always small, the opportunities. And this is critical because it enables a small business owner to create, no kidding, generational wealth. You win a $96.5 million and you keep a 20% profit margin on it. Hey, you're set for life. Same thing with a $15 million or a 30 million or a 79 million. If you win those really big ones, you only got to win one to really, and I do mean really, um, change your life and your children's life for a long time. My companies, I've been in the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies list, the Washington Tech Fast 50 list. I've been invited to various CEO consortiums, and my family owned and operated nonprofit organization was recognized with the President George H.W. Bush Points of Light Award. I have some nonprofit experience in addition to the federal government contracting experience. Plus, I've also launched things in the commercial sector too. I've launched, services, companies. I've launched training companies. I've launched, mobile app based companies and so on and so forth. So I've done a few things in the business world, but without question, the federal government contracting industry has been very, very, very good to me. But this right here is my real credibility slide. For about 10 years, I struggled. I struggled in the federal government contracting industry, and I do mean I struggled. I just couldn't do anything right. And man, I just wasted years of my life just beating my head up against the wall, with nothing happening. This is what it looked like. This is my first company. So I launched it in 2003, and you can tell until it was 2007 that nothing happened. Nothing. I couldn't get any market penetration whatsoever. And then I got a little bit of market penetration, but I didn't know how to scale my company. I really liked that, corporate maturity. And then I relaunched it again in 2010, and I had some success. But again, in 2013, I almost lost that one and only contract. That was one contract, and I almost lost it. I almost lost it, and then I figured it out. I figured out what I needed to do. I figured out how this industry really worked, and everything changed. Um, every single thing that I touched from 2013, once I figured it out, until now, has turned to gold. It really has, especially the federal government contracting industry. So between 2013 and 2016, my company won nearly $400 million in small business prime contracts, leading to my acquisition. So, which I sold for eight figures. I've signed NDAs, so I can't really talk about the specific deal, but I became a decamillionaire after that deal. So it was all good. But I figured it out. And like I said, in 3.5 years, man, I was just, winning hundreds of millions of dollars in work. So what did I figure out? This is what I figured out. The proposal solution isn't all that important, in the aggregate. So I used to limit my pipeline to say, "Ah, I can't bid on that because that's, I don't know how to do it." Or, like, hey, the solution is not that big of a deal. It really isn't. Everybody focuses on it, but it's not. I used to think that the best bidder won. That is not the case. It's the highest scored bid that wins. Big difference between being the best and most capable company bidding and having the highest scored proposal. Big difference. Big difference. You got to stay focused on what really matters. Fact number three, you can build about 95% of your proposal score. No joke. So you can game it. And then fact number four, it is actually here to bid on and win big contracts than it is small ones. I tell people that you can't sell enough cups of lemonade to in order to become successful. You can't do that. It's just so hard to sell a single cup of lemonade, and then when you do, you're making pennies. You know, if you wanna if you wanna buy a bicycle, launch a lemonade stand. If you want a yacht, then you gotta bid on large contracts because that's where all the profit is. And the deal is that most small businesses are terrified to bid on these large prime contracts. So your competition goes from, my worst case is I bid on a contract, a very small prime contract, where I was one of 54 or 55 bidders. No joke. And then my very first prime contract that I won that was worth 15 million, I was one of seven bidders. One of seven. I had, I had six competitors. Now, one was a hell of a lot easier to win than the other one. So that's what I figured out, and that's what really created my tremendous growth curve is these four facts. So let's kind of take a look at that first fact. Everybody, everybody thinks that the solution is everything regarding your proposal score. Now, I will agree, your technical solution is probably, not necessarily, but more than likely the most heavily weighted aspect of your bid. However, the government, they're greedy bastards. They really are. They say, we like your solution, but we want to make sure that we get this same solution every single day. We want to see your quality control plan. And in fact, this isn't just a solution. This is a prime contract. You've got to manage it. We want to see your management plan. And while we're talking about management, how are you even going to take over this contract? How are you going to transition it? How are you going to go from day one of the transition period with zero employees on staff and by the end of that transition period, you're fully staffed and you're taking over the entire mission, and there's no balls dropped in between. We want to see your transition plan. And while we're talking about transition, we want to see your staffing plan. How are you even going to staff it? And oh my gosh, this is a complex prime contract. We want to see your risk management plan, and security is very important to us. We want to see your information security plan, and so on and so forth. So by the time that they ask for all of these other things, your solution is diluted, because if they ask for it, they got to score it, and it's got to be weighted some way. So by the time that every single thing is done, your solution is worth between 20 and 25% of your overall proposal score. Now, look at these sides of these sections. Now, this is pretty close to scale. Your technical solution next to your pricing proposal is the largest one. So you look at your solution and you say, well, that ball isn't the overwhelming majority of my proposal score. In fact, when you start looking at all these other balls combined, it's pretty, you know, consistent with everything else. It's not that much more. Now, I want you to think about the mentality that most small businesses have. They say, oh my gosh, I just read the draft RFP. This is something that we can do. We should really bid on this thing. Wow, we're going to win it because this is something that we can really do. We got a great solution for this thing. Well, guess what? That's 20 to 25% of your overall score. Now, nobody ever takes a look at a draft RFP and they say, wow, we got a great quality control plan. You know, we got to bid on this thing. And they should. Why? Because that quality control plan is probably worth about, I would say, somewhere between 10 to 15% of your overall score. 10 to 15%. And your solution, 20 to 25%. So in the most extreme situation, your quality control plan is worth 15% and your solution is worth 20%. Really not that much difference. But yet nobody ever thinks about a quality control plan. Now, people will go out there and make tons of investments to improve their solution. But what about the quality control plan that nobody ever thinks about? What about the transition plan or the staffing plan or your risk management plan or your security plan or your management section? Oh my gosh, nobody ever thinks about those. Nobody. They always think about that solution. We need to get a cybersecurity expert on our staff so we can do X, Y, and Z. And they'll make these crazy investments. And most of the time, those investments are good for one single bid. And yet, there's ways, and we're going to talk about that. There's ways that you can maximize the vast majority of your bid score with one single investment. So, if these are the things that are going to be scored, how are they going to be scored? Well, every single proposal across the federal government is evaluated the same exact way. The federal government, they are going to assess your and provide you a technical rating, a risk rating, and then what they're going to do is they're going to look at your pricing and make a value determination. Now, the government, they have the option. They can either give you a separate technical and risk rating, or they can give you a combined technical slash risk rating and then compare it to your pricing, and then, uh, so the vast majority of them will provide a combined technical slash risk rating. And the reason why is because if you have an issue that's a technical issue that creates a risk, how do you evaluate that? Do you hit both the technical and the risk? Or it's just really hard to separate, certain issues, whether that's a technical issue or if that's a risk issue. So what they'll do is they'll provide a combined technical slash risk rating. So what does that mean? Risk is literally half of your score, half of your score. And nobody thinks about that risk. So let's take a look at the technical rating first, just to kind of give us a little bit of foundation here. How is the technical rating assessed? Well, it's simple. Basically, your technical rating answers this question. Does your bid address and or exceed RFP requirements? So what they do is they take a look, and they have a scoring rubric of all the requirements in the RFP. So I tell people that proposals are scored; they're not read. Well, of course they're read, but they're not read from the first page to the last page, and then they come up with a technical rating. That's not how they do that. They got a scoring rubric, and they'll say, "Oh, here's a requirement. So where's this requirement addressed in the proposal?" And they'll go find it. It's almost like a word search. So, and then what they do is they find that section where you address that requirement, and they make the assessment. Hey, did they address it, adequately? If so, hey, check in the block. And if you do that for every single one of the requirements, you know what you're going to get? You're going to get green. You're acceptable. Your proposal meets the RFP requirements. Now that begs the question, well, how do you get good scores and outstanding scores? Well, you get good and outstanding scores if you provide something in your proposal that exceeds or what was asked for. For example, you're offering something that wasn't asked for, but offers value and additional benefits to the government. Those are called evaluated strengths. Now, if you failed to meet a requirement, then that's called a weakness. So weaknesses and strengths bump you up and below, the green acceptable. Now, I'm gonna. This is difficult for a lot of people to truly believe, but I have won a lot of bids where I did not have the best solution, and this is how I did it. I was competing against companies that really hammered it. They did a great job. They created a solution. It was just wow. The government loved it, and I would eke along, and I would just barely be compliant. And they would look at it and say, well, technically he's compliant, so we got to give him a green, because he did technically and adequately address all the requirements in the RFP. So we got to give him a green. And then somehow or another, I would win. Now, how did I win? Well, I won because I was smart enough to put things in my proposal that would be considered strengths. So one strength will bump you from a green to a purple. Two strengths will bump you from a green to a blue in a particular section. So I would show up, and this happened, more times than not. I would show up at the kickoff brief, and the government would tell me, say, hey, just to be honest with you, Randy, your company was not our first choice. We unfortunately had to give you the award because you had the highest score proposal. And I'm thinking like, well, because you're idiots. You don't know how to write or your policies and processes on how you evaluate it. If you didn't want me, then you shouldn't have written an RFP that would enable me to win and score it in such a way that would enable me to win. So, but that's what they do. They enable people who know how to game the system to win and win consistently. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, again, your technical rating includes two things. Are you compliant and do you have evaluated strengths? If you're compliant, you're going to get a green. If you have evaluated strengths, one is going to get you a purple, two is going to get you a blue, in that section. Now, if you aren't compliant in a particular area, you're going to get a weakness. And if it's a minor weakness, you're going to get a yellow. But if it's a significant weakness, or if you get two weaknesses, you're going to get a red. That's unacceptable. So that's how you're actually scored. Now let's take a look at your risk rating. How do they assess your risk? Well, risk is nothing more than the source selection committee's confidence in your ability to perform. So what does that mean? That means, how mature is your company? Do we trust what you say? Do we believe that you're going to be able to deliver? You know, but for a small business, you know what they're really asking? This is what they're really asking. Are you going to be able to remain a viable company? Or are you going to be crushed under the weight of this prime contract? The workload. Are you going to be able to effectively manage this prime contract? Things like, hey, prove to me that how to invoice us. These sound like trivial things, but they're not. You know, um, can you identify and manage contract risks? Because you're going to have them. Risk is just a feature of living. It's going to happen. There are going to be risks associated with the contract. Can you identify them and effectively manage them? And then the final thing is are you sufficiently mature and do you have the management systems and process to ensure a quality product is going to be delivered time after time after time on this contract? That is what risk means. It means, do you have the corporate maturity to remain viable, to effectively manage the contract, to identify and manage risks effectively, and to produce high quality deliverables over and over and over? So your risk rating is really your assessment or their assessment of your corporate maturity. That is it. It is that simple. So this is the visual depiction of what I just said. Your risk rating, A, or corporate maturity, half of your proposal score. Your technical rating, again, are you compliant? And do you have any strengths or weaknesses that are going to move you either above or below the acceptable line? It's truly this simple. But here's the reality. Risk, which I'm sure is going to surprise a lot of people, that's literally worth half of their proposal score, is really worth more than that. Why is that? Well, because a lot of the technical requirements in the RFP dictate that you have to have a quality control plan, dictate that you have to have a risk management program, dictate that you have to have the things that, that address risk, and quality and management, And then the second thing is that risk mitigators can be considered strengths. And in fact, for most small business set aside contracts, for the really large ones, that's where most of your strengths are going to come from, by being the lowest risk emitter. And that's going to be an evaluated strength. If you've got risk mitigators in place that are going to significantly reduce the risk to the government above and beyond what was, what they're expecting from a typical small business, then guess what happens? You are going to get an evaluated strength. And I'll prove that to you a little bit later on. So again, for large small business set-aside contracts for small businesses, this is the reality. Risk is probably about 2/3 of your score. No joke, 2/3. So why is risk so important? Well, like I alluded to earlier, uh, you know, every government agency in the federal government, every large federal government contracting company in this industry, they all think the same thing, and that is that small businesses are inherently risky. They consider us to be as risky as eating, gas station sushi, and that is not a joke. But you know what? They're not too far off from that assessment. It's true. Small businesses, we lack the infrastructure that a Northrop Grumman has. This picture right here, this is not exactly me. And, I was actually under my desk, you know, literally in a fetal position, whimpering. That is no joke. 20 minutes before payroll was supposed to be taken out of my business account to pay my employees on my very first prime contract. I was 20 minutes away waiting for a factoring company to approve, financing 20 minutes before it came in. I'm not joking when I say this. It came in at 19 minutes. My payroll was supposed to go out at noon. And I was literally 11:41 a.m. and finally, boom, the money showed up. I was approved. And I will remember that day until I die, because I was literally in a fetal position under my desk whimpering. It was like I was terrified because I didn't have that kind of money. I was hemorrhaging $85,000 in payroll every half month. Boom, 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 boom. And honestly, I really didn't effectively um, know how to do invoicing, and I kept on screwing it up. So, hey, I got a hand raised. I'm going to press on, and I'll get you at the very end. That's probably the best way to do it. So, so let's press on here. It not only matters on prime contract bids, it also, well, actually, let me go back. Is there a problem with, is everything going the way it should be going? Can you still see and hear things? I just want to make sure. Uh, just want to make sure that's still happening. But so I'll press on um, until, like, I see everybody's is gone. So so it's not just important on prime contracts, it's equally important for subcontracting. Now you could be partnered up with the most mature, trusted business in the world. I'm talking about IBM. IBM. IBM can be bidding on a prime contract, and your risk, your corporate maturity as a small business is still vitally important. Why is that? Well, because the small business set aside program mandates that on most of these large full and open competitions, that 29.43% of the value of that contract will go to small businesses. Now, the government knows, that IBM is only going to be able to do about 70% of that contract. Who's going to do that other 30%? Small businesses. That is a massive chunk of the pie that's going to be done by companies that they've never even heard of. So, that is why small business corporate maturity is vitally important, even as a small business sub or teaming partner. If you can prove if you can prove that you're a mature small business, man, you're going to get on as many teaming agreements as you want. Because again, that is the most important thing, to a large prime contract bidder, because they know it. They've already figured it out. They know that risk is literally half of their score, and that, approximately one third of their contract is going to be done by small businesses. Which are inherently risky. Again, think, gas station sushi risky. So that is why it's so important, even as a sub. So now let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about, well, how do you maximize your technical rating? Well, let's get back to this right here. This right here is the typical proposal. Again, you get your technical proposal, which has these, what I call the typical sections. There'll always be a technical solution piece. They'll always have a past performance, a key personnel section. Usually they'll ask for a quality control plan. They'll always ask for a management plan. For larger ones, they'll always ask for a transition plan. If it's secure, if it's a secure contract, or if it deals with data or information, which 95% of all white collar services contracts do, then they'll probably ask for a security plan or an information security plan, or a risk plan. They'll ask for a staffing plan. These are the typical things that they always ask for. So, so how do you maximize your technical rating? Oh, this is the easy part. Easy thing to do. What you do is you go out there and you partner with a big dog partner, like an IBM or Northrop Grumman, if they'll partner with you. But there's a whole bunch of mid majors out there that are hungry and will partner with a small business for a large prime contract in a heartbeat. So you want to find one of those large companies that have proven solutions and great past performances. And they'll write these sections for you for the most part. And then what you have to do as the prime contractor, you've got to go through the review process and with your own compliance matrix to make sure that you're fully compliant with the contract. You got to make sure that you're addressing every single requirement in the RFP. So you have to shred the RFP and pull out all the requirements. And then when you've got your first draft, what you're doing is you're assessing your compliance levels. So that's how you maximize your technical rating. You do that by partnering with a big dog with proven solutions and great past performances. And then in your review process, you have a very detailed compliance review, using your own compliance matrix. Now, now let's, ask the question about, what this webinar is supposed to address. How do you maximize your risk rating? Well, again, you've seen the proposal. Let's take a look at this, the standard typical proposal. These green sections are what I call the standard sections. You're always, whatever you write on one will typically be very consistent with what you write on every single bid. Your quality control plan, it's going to be roughly the same whether or not you're pushing out, software, whether or not you're pushing out, monthly reports, in the form of deliverables. Your quality control plan is roughly going to be very consistent. Now you'll probably have to edit it to page count and that kind of stuff and to make it, more customized and tailored to your customer. But, your quality control plan is your quality control plan. Just like your management section is your management section. Just like your transition plan is your transition plan. Your staffing plan, it's just, hey, who are you recruiting? That's it. It's just labor category descriptions going to be the only thing really different with your staffing plan. So the way you address and maximize your risk rating is you have to write these sections because these are the sections that they're really assessing your corporate maturity. This is where they're getting it from. If you're the prime bidder, these are the sections that you write. A sub isn't going to help you write the management section. And it's your quality control plan, not theirs, because all the deliverables go through the prime. The sub isn't submitting anything to the customer. It's all going through you. All staffing's got to be approved by you as the prime contractor. Security, again, this is all you. Transition, you're the one running the show. It's you. You're the prime contractor. So these sections are always written by the prime contractor, and what they do, the source selection board, is they use these sections to assess your corporate maturity. Now that begs the question, well, how do you, maximize your corporate maturity? Well, ideally, you want to be this guy. You want to have you want to be Mr. Moneybags that has a company that has, several massive prime contracts that you can cite and reference about your performance and say, hey, we're excelling on these contracts. Look at us on this $100 million contract. you know. But the reality of it is you can't do that as a small business. Now, my first company started to be able to do that towards the end, right before I was about ready to graduate, but not at the beginning. I couldn't say, hey, oh, I got a $96.5 million contract. I got a $65 million one. I got a $50 million one. I got a $30 million one. I got a 28.8 million. I couldn't say that, at the very beginning. Now, once I started to have success, I could say that. And, then you're kind of like snowballing and like, wow, but until you get these massive prime contracts and past performances underneath your belt, how do you do it? How do you demonstrate corporate maturity? Well, every high schooler who's in their senior year knows the answer to this thing. And I'm going to let this guy right here, the guy in the circle, Bob. He's my fictitious guy. So, Bob's a high school senior and he wants to become a swanky management consulting for Deloitte or McKinsey or, pick your swanky consulting group. And so what he does his senior year is he creates a resume and he says that he's the president of the Spanish club and that he participates in math competitions and he's got really good grades and and earth science and all this kind of stuff. And he volunteers or he's a Boy Scout. So he blasts that out to McKinsey and Deloitte and Boston Consulting Group, saying that he wants to become a management consulting for their organization. Now, we all know what's going to happen, and that's absolutely nothing. We know that. And the reason why is because there's not a single thing on that resume that shows that he is a low risk hire, that he'll be able to perform the job effectively as a management consultant for McKinsey. Nothing on it. He's got nothing on his resume, zero work experience. So Bob, he's pretty smart. He figures it out his senior year, and he says, "Hey, man, I need to get some credentials that's going to compensate for my total lack of work experience. I want to apply to MIT." So he goes to MIT. He gets a computer science degree, and then he's going to apply to Harvard Business School, across town, and now he's got a Harvard Business School MBA, and then he sits for a CPA. Now he's got three credentials. And now he's got people standing in line to hire him. He still has zero work experience, none, zilch. But he has credentials that validate him as being a low risk employee, that he will be able to effectively perform the job. The MIT degree, the Harvard MBA, and the CPA. Boom, he's in. Again, people are standing in line to hire this guy, even though he has zero experience. Now, we all know that as individuals. We've all had to face that, that dilemma ourselves. And we did whatever we needed to get those credentials in order to compensate for our total lack of experience when we were starting out. It's no different when you're a small business owner. Your small business is not you. You could be the most credentialed, experienced human being in the world, and you probably are. You probably are very seasoned, and most most small business owners are. There's a reason why they're launching companies. But the government is not contracting with you. They're contracting with an asset that you own. And that asset, your small business, its resume is 100% blank. 100% blank as a startup. By definition, you're a startup. You got no work experience. But if you don't have any corporate credentials to compensate for that, you you're never going to have success. It took me almost 10 years to get my first market penetration. Why? Because I was I was selling a company that had a blank resume. My company had zero work experience and had no credentials to validate that we had corporate maturity and that we were low risk. Nothing. So that is how you overcome your limited work experience. And it's always going to be, limited. Why? Because you're always fighting above your weight class. You're always boxing up a weight class. And what do I mean by that? If you're a small business and you want to grow, you got to bid on bigger things than what you are. And then once you win that one, you got to bid on something even bigger than that. So you're never going to have adequate past performances to win the kind of contracts that you'll want to win to grow and create, generational wealth. You'll never be able to do that. You're always going to have to augment that and complement it with corporate credentials. With corporate credentials, I can show you how to make a one-person startup with zero revenue look more mature than its $20 million per year competitor. Think about what I just said. Corporate credentials can make you look more mature than a $20 million per year small business. Because corporate risk is ideally addressed, is not ideally, it's like thoroughly addressed with these credentials. So, and it can also separate you from the crowd. Less than 1% of US businesses can show the ISO logo. Now, I want you to think about what I just said. Less than 1%. You can be a one-person startup, get a corporate credential that will separate you from 99% of the rest of US businesses, both big and small. That's not 1% of small businesses. That's 1% of US businesses. So that is how you can stand out. You want some separation between you and your competitive field, get a corporate credential that places you in the top 1% with respect to corporate maturity. Now, the next obvious question is what the hell is ISO 9001? Well, ISO 9001 Quality Management System Certification. Everybody thinks it has everything to do with quality. No. ISO 9001 are the management systems that a company has to have in order to be able to produce a consistently high quality service or product. It's management systems, not quality. Everybody thinks like, well, quality is not that big of a deal and, it's a joke. And no, it's your management systems to produce a high quality product or service. If you have management systems, you are mature. ISO 9001 is proposal gold. What do I mean by that? Well, again, it's going to maximize your corporate maturity projection. So what is corporate maturity? Well, do you have documented processes and procedures for all of your major business processes? Yes. Do you have documented roles and responsibilities for all the key positions in your company? Not by individual. We're not saying that Bob does this and Bob does. No, your HR director does that. And it doesn't matter whether or not Bob is the HR director or Sally. You know, do you have a formal risk management program? Do you have formal management reviews? Do you have a formal customer satisfaction program? Do you have a formal quality management program? Do you have a formal change management program? Do you have a formal knowledge management program? Are you making data-driven decisions? Are you collecting and analyzing key performance indicators? And so on and so forth. Those are the questions that the source selection board either are directly or indirectly asking you when they review your proposal. That's what they're asking. That's what corporate maturity means. That's what being low risk means. Do you have these things? If you don't have proof of work experience where you can prove that you've delivered high quality products and services over and over and over and over and over at scale, if you don't have that, then you have to have something that can prove that. And ISO 9001 certification proves it. Having the ISO 9001 certification is irrefutable proof of robust corporate maturity. Why do I say that? Well, it means that your management system has been audited by an accredited third party and found to be fully compliant with the ISO 9001 standards, which are the globally accepted industry best practices for management systems. The management systems that you need to consistently produce a high quality product or service. And I joke here, you should commit this statement to memory, but you really should. This should be in your proposal at least 3 or 4 different places because I wouldn't trust the government to read it once and remember it. This is a proof point that is 100% irrefutable and that 99% of your competitors cannot say. They're always going to say, oh, we produce high quality products because we focus on quality and we're committed to high quality and we're committed to this. And, we have a risk management program that does X, Y, and Z and we're low risk and all this kind of stuff. Prove it. Whoa, how do you prove that? I can prove it. You can look at my logo and it proves it. So let's get back to this thing. These are the sections of your proposal where the source selection board is going to assess your corporate maturity to give you a risk rating. ISO 9001, the management systems that you have been validated to possess, maximizes these scores in your proposal. Let's take a look at your quality control plan. I tell you what, if you don't maximize your score in the quality control plan by being ISO 9001 quality management system certified, you're in the wrong industry. I'm telling you, you need to, you know, pick a different field, pick something different because it writes it. It literally falls out of your quality control plan. Your ISO 9001 quality management system is a management system that writes your management section. It really does. Your transition plan is nothing more than risk management, change management, knowledge management. That's all. That's all a transition plan is. And those are all three pillars of an ISO 9001 quality management system. Your staffing and security plans, they are typically the highest risk areas of a contract. Hey, this is a classified contract. How are you going to be able to find top secret cleared, employees in order to staff it? That's a major risk. Are you going to be able to staff it? These are hard to find people. So guess what you're going to be applying to staffing? Your risk management, your risk management program. And you're going to be saying to the government in your proposal that you've identified this as a severe risk. You've assessed it. You've got a risk management plan, and you've got risk management reviews every single month or weekly or whatever it is, and that's how you do it. That's how you address it. You throw in something, and this is so funny. Um, that somewhere in the RP, they're going to ask you for your risk management approach or procedures or plan or something. And, I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, and 95% of all companies use the same damn 3 pages when it talks about risk management. It talks about severity and how it's ranked, and then it's talk about probability of occurrence and how it's ranked. They're giving a score between 1 and 5 in both of those, and then there's a matrix, and the top right corner is red. Red is bad, then there's yellow, and there's green, and that's how they assess risk, and that is literally 90% of their risk management approach. If you're ISO 9001 certified, you're talking about things like risk appetite. You have a risk appetite policy. Where are you willing to accept risk? Because risk is real. It happens. Risk exists. You got to manage it. And some risk is good. For example, if you say, I'm going to eliminate all risk because risk is bad, you just projected yourself as a ridiculously immature small business. I'll give you a trivial example. You go to work. You can say, "Whoa, there's risk of a car accident. Oh, I'm going to avoid that risk completely. I'm going to walk to work." Well, you've just wasted 3 hours of your day each way walking to work. You've lost a total of 6 hours a day in productivity. 6 hours a day. Wouldn't it be better to accept that risk and manage it effectively? If you're not a good driver, hey, carpool in with somebody else and let them drive, or metro in, or maybe you take the side roads, or maybe you leave earlier where there's less traffic, or maybe you move in a little bit closer where you don't have to get on the beltway every single morning. You manage that risk. Managing that risk is a good thing because it just increases your productivity by 6 additional hours. And if you start talking about risk appetite, the government is going to say, well, nobody else is talking at this level. It's just like if you have a contractor and that's going to build a deck on the back of your house, and the first contractor comes in and they start talking about things like, yeah, we use really good, high grade 2x4s, and Bob's really good at painting. He does a really good job at painting, and you know what? We really clean up well, you know, and after we're done. Now, if you get 5 proposals that talk about that and they're just carbon copies of each other, and then you got another one that comes in and he's talking about county ordinance. Like, oh my gosh, none of these others are talking about that. None of them are talking about having to get a permit, getting it approved, talking about the various, inspections that are required by the county to come in at different phases of the building project. Oh my gosh. So they're talking about building at a completely different level of maturity than the competition. So who do you think is going to win that bid every single time? It's going to be the company that's talking about an aspect at such a high level of maturity that makes the other companies, it's called ghosting, makes them look really bad. And that's what you're doing with an ISO 9001 quality management system. You are talking about change management. You're talking about, document control, version control. You're talking about management reviews, key performance indicators. You're talking about things like that. You're not talking about like our company is totally committed to high quality. Quality is, job number one. Quality is the focus of all of our employees. Come on. All that stuff is just regurgitating cliches. It's got to have something tangible. And if you can actually cite corporate documents in your proposal, like this is our risk management policy. Boom. Oh, we're going to include that in the addendum. And you start citing like 25 different, you know, quality management, risk management, management review, audit, internal audits. Oh my gosh, you don't have to police us. We police ourselves. We have an internal audit program. We have program management reviews. You know, we're tracking these following key performance indicators, and you put these corporate documents as an addendum in the back of your proposal. They're not going to be read. They're not going to be evaluated. But let me tell you something. This is a trick I learned. You know, and I use this thing over and over and over and over and over. You know, since you're putting in an addendum, they're not going to call you non-compliant because it's not part of the page count that you're listing in that section. But what they'll do is they're going to rip it out of that binder and they're going to throw it away. Now, somewhere along the walk between sitting down and taking out about a 2-inch stack of quality management and risk management processes, policies, procedures, guidelines, manuals, roles and responsibilities, internal audit reports, you know, taking that 2-inch stack of those documents and that walk to the trash can where they're going to throw it away, somewhere along that walk, you become the low risk bidder. And I've used that tactic over and over and over in lots of different areas, and it has been highly effective. So let's see this in action. This right here is an actual debrief of a contract that we won. It was worth $65 million with NGA. This is their slide. I did redact the name of my company because I no longer own it. But it's Analytic Strategies. So this is the score that we made. And you're going to say, well, Randy, that looks a hell of a lot different than, you know, what you were showing us. Well, yeah, it looks a little different, but it isn't. So if you look at how this was actually scored, everything was considered basically a sub-factor of factor one, which is the technical and management score. You know, this whole damn proposal is in factor one. So these sub-factors are basically your entire proposal. Now, you did have a past performance, which was factor two, and you had something called security. That was you either had the security clearance or you didn't. You know that's it was either pass fail either you know because they didn't want to have to wait in order to grant a company of the security clearance. Why? Because they're NGA. You know they don't want to deal with that. And then finally pricing was in the form of a sample task order proposed price. So because this was an IDIQ, and that's how they did that. Well, if you look at your first sub factor, and again, like I said, it all came down to these four sub factors. You know, the management plan included the quality plan. Your staffing plan also included key personnel. Your sub-factor 1.4, which was sample task order proposal, that was actually your technical solution. And then the sub-factor 1.3 was the transition plan. So, you know, if you look at it, it included every single one of these things. And most of the time, you know, every single bid, it'll look different, but basically they're all covered. So if you look at them, so the question is how did we get all these purples and blues? Um, and the one green. Again, I'm a little disappointed in the green because I actually thought that maybe we had, you know, we wrote it with the intent to get, you know, strings, evaluated strings, but apparently we didn't. So that's an area that we focused on for the next bid to improve that. So win, lose, or draw, always request a debrief because again, they will tell you how you were evaluated. And they will compare your score with the winning bidder. So, well, since we were the winning bidder, it was only our score. But had we lost, we would have saw our score compared to the winning bidder score. So anyway, we won this, and we were not the lowest price. You know, not even close to being the lowest price. That we did learn. We won it because we had a really high score. They considered our score to be quote unquote purple plus. So that's how they evaluated our overall score. So we were between purple and blue. So how did we get the strengths in order to get those purples and blues? Well, this is our strength. You know, this is our first strength. Now, again, this is their slide. I didn't doctor anything up. I did highlight it just to make it a little bit easier for you to read the sections, and I pulled out the you know the text so you can read it a little bit bigger. The offer's corporate experience, backed up by its proven certified processes, ISO 9001, would reduce the risk and improve the overall management. If you look closely, they actually consider that to be a significant strength, and ISO certification was cited not once but twice on their justification for this strength. Our second strength was shockingly similar. Well, first of all, let's go back to this thing. Notice how it deals with risk. Risk, again, effectively, it was like two-thirds of the overall score. And, you know, we got a strength on risk. Let's go look at the next one. The offer's ability to relate risk management approaches to the ISO 9001 quality management system allows the government to have greater confidence. Well, that was shockingly simpler, similar to the other one. But, they consider that to be different. And again, ISO certification was not cited once, it was cited twice in this evaluated strength. Please note that it dealt with risk. Now let's look at our third evaluated strength. Their ISO 9001 certified processes aligned to best in industry practices that will help streamline onboarding of new employees. Well, the first thing, everybody looks at that and they say, well, Randy, this has nothing to do with risk. This one has everything to do with risk. This was probably the most risk-centric strength that we got. And the reason why is because we cited staffing as, the highest risk on this entire contract. And we showed them that we identified it was in our risk register. We assessed it. We showed them our risk assessment. And then we created a risk management plan where we were managing that risk. So the reality of it is, you know, we got this basically because of our risk management program. And it was in, our risk management programs right out of our ISO 9001 quality management system. So we got these three risks. We got three risks. We needed two to get a blue, and we needed one to get a purple. Now, the technical solution was we did a really good job on that too, and we got blue. But for these two, the blue and the purple here in subfactor 1.1 and 1.2, we needed three strengths. We got three strengths, and they were all risk related. Every single one of them. Even this one where it doesn't seem like it is, but it was, because we were talking about, that was being this is how we're addressing our primary risk, which is staffing. And so we got our third strength there. So not only will, this is, I'm paying lip service to this, like saying like, hey, it's going to help you win contracts, but it's not real. It totally is real. In 2013, I was literally on the verge of losing my one and only prime contract. And the reason why is because I lacked the corporate maturity to scale and to effectively deliver a high quality product or service. Like I said, I almost lost my one and only contract in 2013. And that's when I sat there my COO at the time and we had a little bit of disagreement. He says, "No, Randy, we're agile. I said, "No, buddy, we're chaotic." He says, "No, we're a small business and we're quick to respond. We're fast. No, we're about ready to lose this thing." And that's when I focused on establishing some corporate maturity, and I researched that. That became my number one priority as the CEO of a company. How are we going to improve our corporate maturity? And I figured it out, like saying, hey, we're going to use the ISO framework, because now we have something that we can follow. We have standards that we know we have to meet in order to be mature. The alternative to that is to try to figure out what do we need to be mature. Like, man, that's just hard because you don't know what you don't know. The ISO standards tell you what you need in order to be mature, and then you create processes tailored, to your company to meet those standards. And that's what we did. And by using the ISO framework, we also got to take credit for it. By being ISO certified, we were able to prove it to people. So in summary, this right here is the growth strategy that's going to, knock it out of the park. Invest in your corporate maturity. Get these corporate credentials that you can use for every single damn bid. Every single one of them. These green sections are pretty fairly standard. They don't change that much. So an investment to maximize the scores in these, you get to reuse over and over and over again. And then those same credentials that's going to help you maximize this part, your risk rating, is also going to help you find and convince better partners to partner with you. These big companies, they have finite bid and proposal budgets. They're not going to invest, any fraction of their bid and proposal budget to be a sub or be a teaming partner under a small business that doesn't look like they can win. So if you have ISO credentials, now all of a sudden you look like you're a very winnable partner for these large business partners who can help you maximize these sections, the solution, key personal, and past performance sections. So that's the strategy. That strategy, won me nearly $400 million in prime contracts in about 3.5 years. So it's highly effective? And I'm asked that question every single week, at least once. Hey Randy, what's the strategy? How'd you really do it? Well, this is how I really did it. I invested in my corporate maturity, which maximized about two-thirds of every single one of my proposal scores. And then it also helped me get better partners that would, in essence, give me the best solution or a really good solution or a winnable solution, an adequate one. And that's how I grew. But don't believe me. I don't want you to. I want you to do your own research here. In 2014, Oasis came out as the biggest, the best contract vehicle. They had a small business side to it as well. And this contract is where all the hard work was going to go on, all the complex stuff, R&D work, IT services, software development, engineering services, all the really hard stuff is going on Oasis. Billions of dollars being pumped onto it. And my first company, Analytic Strategies, in 2014, we had corporate credentials, and those corporate credentials were evaluated as part of our proposal, and you were giving points. On contract vehicles, they evaluate things slightly differently, and we were getting a lot of points for that. So anyway, um, 5 years later, so many companies like mine had grown so rapidly that we sold, and so the whole bunch of us are no longer in existence because we were bought by other companies. And then there were a bunch of us that had grown so massively, but were still, that we decided not to sell, that they had to replace. So they had to replace 58 of us. 53% of those new onboarded companies were ISO certified, and 31% were CMMI appraised. Now, CMMI appraisal is something that's more complex than ISO, but you have to have some contracts underneath your belt, and it's more expensive, and it takes a long time to get that. So basically, 70% had one or the other, but it was actually a lot more than that because a lot of these were joint ventures that didn't have websites, so I couldn't verify, if they had ISO or not. But these were so it was that many companies. 70% of the ones that actually had websites actually, had corporate credentials. What's more impressive, though, is I want you to show you the companies that were kicked off, that were off-ramped because they had just grown so massively, and they weren't acquired. So there were 26 companies that were, again, that weren't acquired like mine was, that just had to be off-ramped. They were just massive. I think the largest one is, about $300 million a year. Really big company. 23 out of these 26 companies were ISO certified. That's 88%. 9 out of 10 of the absolute best small businesses in 2019 in the federal government contracting industry were ISO certified. 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. So, don't believe what I'm saying. Do your own research. Now, the next question is how hard is it for a small business to get ISO certified? Believe it or not, getting ISO certification for a small business is a hell of a lot easier than it is for a larger business. Why? Two reasons. One, ISO, the organization that creates the standards and oversees the certification process, they have a policy that your ISO program should reflect the size and complexity of your company. So a company like IBM going through the ISO process, buddy, that's hard. They're expecting a lot from them because they're IBM. They're massive. They got the resources. They're going to be quality teams. They're going to be, they're going to be a whole bunch of different people. But for a small business, um, they expect it to reflect the size and complexity of the small business. So they're not expecting much. The second thing about it is much of these standards aren't applicable to you yet because you haven't grown into those requirements yet. I'll give you a perfect example for like ISO 27001, information security management. It's the hottest one going because information security is the number one risk with respect to federal government contracting. You can't pick up a newspaper and not see a cyber attack or a ransomware attack or a data leakage or a data breach or all that kind of stuff. So information security management is again the most important risk right now in the eyes of the federal government. To get ISO 27001 certified, it is ridiculously hard for a big company. Why? Because they have their own clouds. They have their own firewalls. They have their own WANs, wide area networks. They have their own LANs. They have all this stuff because they're big companies. All of that stuff, it now falls underneath the purview of ISO 27001. Now, for a small business, hey, you know what you're focusing on? Having a clear desk, clear screen policy. You're talking about having a shred log of all the things that you printed out that's proprietary or controlled or classified or something like that. You got a shredder, and when you shred it, you log it to make sure that it is, it was. You have controlled access to certain types of documents in your document control system. You have a policy about how frequently your employees must change their password. You have policies regarding what internet sites can be accessed from your IP, that kind of stuff. So it's very, very, very simple compared to what a big business has to go through. Why? Because whatever technology you have is probably outsourced. You're either using Google or Microsoft or Amazon for everything, for your cloud, for Google Drive, whatever it is, your email servers, and they're the ones who meet all the standards. So you don't have to. So you can get an incredibly, incredibly prestigious and impressive ISO 27001 certification that your big business partners are struggling to get, and they're looking at you and they're thinking like, "Oh my God, how could you do it? You've done something that we're struggling to try to do, and we're a big business." So you get all that instant credibility. Um, it's easier to get as a small business than it is a bigger one, and we make it even easier. Um, when I launched Government Contracting Academy in 2020, because I suck at retirement, I had to do something, so I decided to give back to the industry. I told people, I said, hey, you need to have, corporate credentials. And then they went out and priced it and they said, oh my God, Randy, do you know how expensive that stuff is? And then they asked me, say, Randy, can you help us? And so I said, okay. So even though I hate, I won't lie to you, I hate doing ISO paperwork because nothing is about as boring to a person who has ADHD than doing, quality management paperwork. But if I wanted to truly help out and give back to the community, I tried to do the things that people needed, and that was a big area that my clients needed who were in Government Contracting Academy. So I started to help them. So I don't do what was done to me. What was done to me was I hired a consultant to help me get, ISO certified. And they said, well, Randy, your company needs to have a formal risk management program. Call us when you got one, and then we'll take a look at it. So, I shut my office down for about 3 weeks, and we whiteboard this stuff. We need processes. How are we going to do that? Oh my God, we don't know anything about risk to begin with. So we started researching it, and then we say, okay, let's do this process right here. Now we needed a manual to kind of provide the overarching, approach that we were going to take, and then we needed to have policies, and then we need to have roles and responsibilities. We needed to have templates, and we needed to create all this stuff. And when we created it, about a month later, again, nothing happened in my corporate office for that month. We called the consultant back in. They say, well, Randy, that's non-compliant. You need to fix it. It's like, why don't you freaking help us, and tell us? Well, I do one better than that. I give you a set of 100% fully compliant ISO documents tailored for a small business in the government contracting industry. These are the program documents that I created in 2013 and that were used by all my companies until I sold my last one in 2020. They continuously got better and better and better and better and better. And since 2020, I've helped over 100 small businesses get ISO certified, and every single bit of feedback that an auditor had, I implemented those positive changes to it. So they've never failed a single ISO certification, and I give them to you. And not only will they get you certified, but they're also going to help you mature your company. These are the processes that help me, win, hundreds of millions of dollars as a small business owner. So now the next question is, oh, and so I give you all the documents that you need. And then what I do is I give you sample artifacts. For example, if you're using these policies and processes and procedures, you got to prove that you're doing it. So they'll typically create an artifact. For example, you'll have a form that you have to fill out to assess a risk. Now, once you assess a risk, you're going to have a completed form. Now that form needs to be kept for your own personal records, but also for an audit. So what I'll do is I'll give you sample records. So now these sample records show what a completed one of these processes look like in the form of an artifact. Now, what I do is I create really authentic examples for you. For example, I will create a risk and put that in your risk register for cash flow. And if you don't think you have a cash flow risk, as a small business owner, mm, we need to have a one-on-one discussion. It's not a matter of if you're going to have cash flow concerns, it's a matter of when. So when you assess that risk, it's going to be a severe risk. So now you've got a completed risk assessment for a risk that we identified and logged in your risk register, and we assessed it as severe. Now, since it's severe, your policies state that you have to have a risk management plan to effectively do it. So we create a risk management plan that basically says, hey, start looking for additional sources for financing and consider, cash flow when you're, deciding to bid on multiple contracts simultaneously. Make sure that it's kind of going into your thinking process. So now we have a risk management plan. Now, those are example ones, but if you sign them, they become your risks. And that's what 99.999% of our clients do is they say like, oh my God, you've just done some of our work for us, Randy. That was a risk that we were going to identify anyway. And you did it all for us. So they sign these risks or they sign these documents. And now, those are auditable records. Now, the auditor can only go back 3 months. So what we do is if you want us to, and then like everybody does, we'll backdate your ISO program by 3 calendar months. We create these sample records for you. And if you sign them, they become your real records and you are ready within just a few weeks for an ISO audit that we go through with you because I become your internal auditor. So I go through the process with you. Now, here's the other thing that US auditors won't tell you. Um, since you're a services company, you could be audited remotely because they can't an auditor can't go to your government site and audit you on site supporting a customer. So they're allowed to do a remote one. So what we do is we upload your records and your documents to their site, and they conduct the audit in their office, not yours. And an audit takes a minimum of 3 to 4 days, whether you're a one person company or more. It's going to take a minimum of 3 to 4 days. So now the next question is how much does something like this cost? Well, I just talked about ISO 27001 information security being the hottest one going. Google it. This is straight off of Google. Um, you know, it costs on average of $55,000 to get ISO 27001 certified. $55,000. So, um, what I do is I give you I pay the auditor. This is total cost. This is for the documents, my help, my consulting, uh, my presence and participation in your audit, and the actual audit fees, the maintenance fees on that because these auditors have like tiny little hidden charges here and there. That's total cost. So um, so you can get not one but two ISO certifications, ISO 9001 and whatever you want your second one to be. If you're in a white collar company, most of the time it's 27001 because that's the most popular and the hottest one going. And to be honest with you, it's the most expensive one too. So for 24,000 bucks, you get two ISO certifications for literally half the cost of getting one. Plus, I throw in the GovCon Advanced program, which is a $10,000 value. And what it includes. Let's talk about this a little bit. That includes 25 courses I'm keeping on expanding it over and over and over. It's approaching about 200 lessons where, one of the things we do is we help you write proposals. We show you how to develop account plans. We tell you how to price proposals, what infrastructure you really need and what you really don't need, how to save money. Every single person who's gone through this program, they said, "Oh my gosh, it saved us a ton of money on things that we thought we needed but really didn't." You helped us avoid these 25 mistakes because, again, it took me 10 years to figure it out. I try to get that down from years to weeks for you to figure it out. So, within a couple of months, you've got the same learning curve that I had that took me, again, a decade to do. You will have a ton of business tools. I say hundreds, but it's probably close to thousands. I give you spreadsheets that have all the formulas built in for your pricing proposals. I have sample, you know, pipeline, review spreadsheets and tools, a ton of templates, a ton of example proposal content, that you can see. My goal is to never have a client start with a blank sheet of paper. You want to do an offer letter, contingent offer letter, you need an employee handbook, you need a benefits, administration manual, all of those things. You need an onboarding check sheet. Any and every single thing you need, there's a template for it. So again, my goal is to make sure that you never start with a blank sheet of paper. And we have weekly meetings, you know, and these are all online, self-paced. You could plow through them, as quickly as you can, or self-paced, whatever you want to do. But every single week we have what I call the cohort catch-up. And we get on at Wednesday at noon Eastern, and everybody shares ideas, creates synergy. A lot of these GCA clients are creating joint ventures together. They're partnering on efforts together. They're working together. They're helping each other. Like, hey, how did you get HubZone? They're helping each other do that kind of thing. And then every Friday morning, I have office hours that I make sure my calendar is 100% free for any GCA people who need to meet one-on-one to discuss things. So this right here, again, are some of the topics we're talking about. The solicitation process. We're talking about how to create or how to identify the best markets for your company, how to launch a legal company, what corporate infrastructure do you need, and how to get it, most cost effectively. Marketing, how to help you out with marketing with a whole bunch of templates, and what makes a good website, and what makes a good capability brief, what makes a good capability statement with templates, how to evaluate an RFP, how to create account plans, pipeline development and management, capture, plan development, proposal writing and development, pricing, just all that kind of stuff. So, um, so that's basically it. Again, don't forget about the course.